Now let's begin. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the modest two-bedroom apartment where Norman Benjamin sat at his small kitchen table, scanning the financial reports on his tablet. At 63, his silver hair and weathered hands told stories of hard work, but his sharp eyes missed nothing in the columns of numbers before him. The apartment was clean but unremarkable: second-hand furniture, a television from 5 years ago, kitchen appliances that worked perfectly fine despite their age. Norman had learned long ago that wealth whispered while poverty shouted. He'd grown up in Section 8 housing with a single mother who worked 3 jobs, wearing clothes from the Salvation Army and eating mayonnaise sandwiches when times were especially tight. At 15, he'd started a lawn care business with a rusty mower he'd fixed himself. By 18, he owned 6 mowers and employed 4 people. By 25, he'd pivoted into property management after buying his first condemned building for $8,000, renovating it himself, and flipping it for $42,000. Now, at 63, Norman's portfolio included 47 residential properties, 3 commercial buildings, a stake in a private equity firm, and enough investments to generate 6 figures monthly in passive income alone. His net worth hovered somewhere around $32 million, though he'd stopped counting precisely after the first $10 million. None of this showed in his lifestyle. He drove a 7-year-old Honda Civic, shopped at discount grocery stores, and lived in this simple apartment in a working-class neighborhood. People assumed he was a retired postal worker or mechanic, living on Social Security and a modest pension. Norman preferred it that way. He'd seen what the appearance of wealth did to people, how it changed relationships, attracted parasites, and corrupted character. His daughter Lindsay knew he was comfortable, but he'd never revealed the full extent of his assets. He wanted her to build her own life, make her own choices, find love for the right reasons. The phone rang, interrupting his review. Norman smiled when he saw Lindsay's name on the screen. "Morning, sweetheart," he answered. The sound that came back stopped his heart. Lindsay was crying. Not just tears, but the kind of sobbing that came from somewhere deep and broken. "Dad," she managed between gasps. "Dad, I don't know what to do." Norman was already standing, his protective instincts firing. "What happened? Are you hurt? Is it Gabriel?" "Gabriel's parents," she choked out. "They came over last night. They sat us down and told Gabriel he needs to divorce me. They said we're too poor, that I'm dragging down the family name, that Gabriel deserves better than someone from our limited background." Norman's jaw tightened. He'd met Carol and Dolores Compton exactly 3 times, at the engagement party, the wedding, and one awkward Christmas dinner. Each time, they'd looked at him with barely concealed disdain, making pointed comments about his quaint lifestyle and simple career. They'd assumed he was poor because he didn't flaunt wealth. They'd never bothered to ask. "What did Gabriel say?" Norman asked, keeping his voice calm despite the fury building inside him. He told them it was ridiculous at first, but they wouldn't stop. They kept talking about their country club friends, about image, about the Compton family legacy. They showed him financial projections about how marriage to me was limiting his potential. "Dad, they've been planning this." They had charts. Norman sat back down, his mind already working. Charts. They tracked every penny Gabriel has spent on me over the last year. They calculated what our combined income would be versus what he could make if he married someone from their circle. They've apparently already picked out someone, Brittany Sutton, some banker's daughter. They've been setting up chance encounters for months. "And Gabriel?" Lindsay's voice cracked. "He said he loves me, but he's been so stressed. His parents control his trust fund until he's 35. They're threatening to cut him off completely if he doesn't see reason. We have bills, Dad. The car payment, rent, my student loans. I told him we'd figure it out, but he's scared." Norman remembered Gabriel Compton, 28, pleasant enough, worked as a mid-level analyst at his father's commercial real estate firm. Not a bad person, just weak. Raised with money, never had to fight for anything, and now crumbling under pressure from the people who controlled his life. "Where are you now?" Norman asked. "At the apartment." Gabriel went to work. His mother called this morning and told me I should make this easy on everyone and start looking for my own place. "Dad, I don't know what to do. I love him, but I can't fight his whole family." Norman stood and walked to his bedroom closet. Behind his modest collection of jeans and polo shirts, a small safe held documents that told a very different story than his apartment suggested. "Lindsay, I need you to do something for me, he said calmly. Invite them to dinner. Carol, Dolores, and Gabriel. This Saturday. Dad, I don't think. Trust me. Tell them I'd like to discuss the situation like adults. Tell them I respect their concerns and want to find an amicable solution. Make it sound like I'm going to convince you to let Gabriel go. There was silence on the line. Then, what are you planning? Just trust me, sweetheart. Can you do that? Okay, Lindsay said quietly. I trust you. After hanging up, Norman sat in his small apartment and let himself feel the anger. Not the explosive kind. He'd learned to control that decades ago. This was the cold, calculating anger that had built an empire from nothing. The Comptons thought they knew who he was based on his zip code and his car. They'd judged his daughter unworthy without knowing the first thing about either of them. They were about to receive an education. Norman spent the next hour making calls. First to his property manager, then to his accountant, then to an old friend who worked in private investigation. By the time he finished, he had a much clearer picture of Carol and Dolores Compton. Carol owned Compton and Associates, a commercial real estate firm that had been in the family for 3 generations. On paper, it looked successful, an impressive office downtown, high-profile clients, membership in all the right clubs. Norman's investigator friend dug deeper and found a different story. The company was hemorrhaging money, kept afloat by increasingly creative accounting and a credit line that was nearly maxed out. Carol had made bad investments in 2022, doubling down on office space right before the remote work revolution gutted demand. He was facing margin calls on leverage positions. Dolores Compton, née Bradshaw, came from old money that had evaporated 2 generations ago. She maintained the appearance of wealth through maxed credit cards and a trust fund that paid just enough to cover country club dues. She drove a leased BMW, wore designer clothes bought on credit, and lived in a house mortgaged to the hilt. The Comptons were broke. Worse than broke, they were drowning in debt while maintaining an elaborate facade. Gabriel's trust fund, which they controlled, was likely already being borrowed against. They needed him to marry money because they needed an infusion of cash. Brittany Sutton's family had real wealth, the kind that could save Compton and Associates from collapse. This wasn't about protecting Gabriel from a poor match. This was about their own survival, dressed up as family pride. Norman smiled for the first time since Lindsay's call. He knew exactly how to handle this. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather. Norman had chosen his venue carefully, not his apartment, but a property he'd recently purchased in an up-and-coming neighborhood. The house was small, a 2-bedroom bungalow that needed work. He'd made sure to leave paint cans in the garage and tools scattered around, as if he were doing repairs himself. Lindsay arrived first with Gabriel, who looked nervous and exhausted. Norman hugged his daughter tight and shook Gabriel's hand firmly. Thanks for coming, Norman said. I know this is awkward for everyone. Gabriel managed a weak smile. I appreciate you trying to help us find a solution, Mr. Benjamin. The Comptons arrived 15 minutes late, which Norman suspected was intentional, a power move. Carol Compton emerged from his leased BMW in a designer suit that probably cost $3,000. Dolores wore enough jewelry to stock a small boutique, each piece carefully chosen to broadcast wealth. They both surveyed Norman's small house with expressions that mixed pity and disgust. Norman, Carol said, extending a hand without warmth. Thank you for hosting. Of course, Norman replied, matching his lukewarm grip. Come on in. I hope you don't mind the mess. I've been doing some renovations. Dolores sniffed delicately as she entered, her eyes cataloging every piece of discount furniture, every scuffed wall, every sign of what she assumed was poverty. How charming, she said in a tone that meant the opposite. Very rustic. They gathered in the living room. Norman had set out coffee and store-bought cookies, which Dolores declined with a wrinkled nose. The tension was thick enough to cut. Carol cleared his throat. Norman, I appreciate you being reasonable about this situation. It's nothing personal, you understand. We simply want what's best for Gabriel, and we've determined that this marriage isn't financially viable for his future. Norman nodded slowly. I see. And you've discussed this with Gabriel? We have, Dolores interjected. He understands our concerns, even if he's allowing emotion to cloud his judgment temporarily. Young love is wonderful, but it doesn't pay bills. Lindsay's jaw tightened. Norman reached over and squeezed her hand. You're right, Norman said. Love doesn't pay bills. Financial stability matters. That's why I thought we should all sit down and discuss the reality of the situation. Carol looked pleased. Exactly. Now, we've prepared a proposal that would help Lindsay transition. Before we get to that, Norman interrupted gently. I'd like to ask you both a question. What do you think I do for a living? The Comptons exchanged glances. You're retired, aren't you? Dolores said. Lindsay mentioned you used to be in property management or something. Or something, Norman agreed. Gabriel, your father is in commercial real estate, correct? Yes, sir, Gabriel answered. Then you understand the market. Carol, what would you say is the most important factor in building wealth through real estate? Carol looked confused by the change in subject, but answered, location and timing. Buy low, sell high, or hold for appreciation. Exactly right, Norman said. He stood up. I'd like to show you something. Why don't we all take a drive? A drive? Dolores frowned. Norman, we came here to discuss. I know what you came here to discuss, Norman said, his voice still pleasant, but carrying an edge now. Humor me. It won't take long. They piled into two cars, Gabriel and Lindsay in Gabriel's sedan, the Comptons in their BMW, and Norman in his Honda. He led them through the neighborhood, then across town to a historic district where Victorian homes lined tree-shaded streets. Norman pulled up in front of a beautifully restored three-story Victorian painted in tasteful gray and white. It was worth easily $2 million. This is the first property I ever bought, Norman said as they all got out. Paid $8,000 for it in 1988. It was condemned, roof caved in, foundation cracked, drug dealers using it as a shooting gallery. I spent a year rebuilding it myself. Sold it for $42,000. Carol looked confused. That's quite a profit margin for a first flip. It was, Norman agreed. So I used that money to buy 2 more condemned properties. Renovated those. Sold them. Bought 4 more. You see the pattern? He got back in his car. They drove to a luxury apartment complex on the waterfront. Norman pulled into the owner's parking spot. This is my first commercial property, he said. Bought the building in 1995 for $300,000 when the waterfront was still industrial. Spent 5 years converting it to luxury apartments. It generates about $40,000 a month in rental income now. The property is worth approximately $8 million. Dolores's face had gone pale. Carol's expression was unreadable. There are 48 units, Norman continued. Full occupancy rate. I could sell tomorrow and retire comfortably. But why would I? Passive income is the key to real wealth. Wouldn't you agree, Carol? Gabriel was staring at his father-in-law with his mouth open. Lindsay squeezed his hand, her own expression carefully neutral. She was beginning to understand what her father was doing. Norman drove them to a small office building downtown. This one I picked up in 2008 during the crash. Owner was desperate, sold for half what it was worth. I spent 2 years filling it with tech startups, gave them favorable rates to build relationships. 3 of those startups went on to major success. One offered to buy the building from me for 3 times what I paid. I declined. Their rent keeps going up with their success. The tour continued. A strip of commercial properties that Norman had assembled piece by piece over a decade. A residential neighborhood where he owned 18 homes, all rented to families with stable jobs. A warehouse district where he'd bought early and held as the area gentrified, watching values multiply. By the time they reached the 5th property, Carol's face had turned a concerning shade of red. Dolores looked like she might be sick. How many properties do you own? Gabriel finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Norman pulled out his phone and scrolled through a spreadsheet. Residential properties, 47. Commercial buildings, 3. Land holdings, several parcels I'm waiting to develop or sell. I stopped counting the exact value after I hit 8 figures. My accountant tells me it's around 32 million now. Give or take a few million depending on market fluctuations. The silence in the car was deafening. The apartment where I live? Norman continued. I own the building. I live there because it's quiet, the neighbors are good people, and honestly, I like the neighborhood. The car I drive is paid off and runs perfectly. Why would I replace it? The clothes I wear are comfortable. I don't need to broadcast wealth. Real wealth doesn't need an audience. He turned to look directly at Carol. Now, let's talk about your concern that my daughter isn't financially suitable for your family. Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No sound came out. Norman drove them back to the small house where they'd started. Once inside, He pulled out a folder from a briefcase that had been waiting on the kitchen counter. I had a researcher look into Compton and Associates, Norman said, spreading documents on the table. Interesting reading. You're carrying $17 million in leveraged debt, Carol. Your office building downtown? You took a variable rate loan that's adjusted 3 times in the last year. Your commercial tenants are leaving because you can't afford building maintenance. You've got margin calls coming due on properties you bought at peak prices. Carol's face went from red to white. That's private information. You had no right. Public records, Norman corrected. Anyone can access them if they know where to look. Your company is 3 months from insolvency. Maybe less. He turned to Dolores. And you. The Bradshaw Trust Fund pays you $42,000 a year. Your credit card debt is north of $200,000. The house is mortgaged at 95% loan to value. You're living on borrowed money and borrowed time. Dolores stood up, shaking. How dare you? I dare because you tried to destroy my daughter's marriage to save yourselves, Norman said, his voice hard now. This was never about protecting Gabriel from a poor match. You need him to marry Brittany Sutton because her family has the cash to bail out your failing company. You were willing to break his heart and ruin my daughter's life to save your own skins. Gabriel turned to his parents, his expression a mixture of betrayal and horror. Is that true? All of this is true. Carol couldn't meet his son's eyes. Dolores opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The trust fund you control? Norman continued. I'm guessing you've already been borrowing from it. The ledgers will tell the story if Gabriel asks for an audit. You can't prove, Carol started. I can, Norman said simply. I've already got my forensic accountants looking into it. Takes about a week to get a complete picture, but the preliminary numbers are damning. You've taken at least $200,000 from Gabriel's trust to cover company expenses. Gabriel stood abruptly. You've been stealing from me? It's not stealing, Carol protested. It's a loan. We were going to pay it back once the Sutton deal went through. The Sutton deal, Gabriel repeated, his voice hollow. You were going to pimp me out to save your company. Don't be dramatic, Dolores snapped. Brittany is a lovely girl from a good family. I'm married to Lindsay. Gabriel shouted, the first time any of them had heard him raise his voice. I love Lindsay. I don't give a damn about Brittany Sutton or her family's money. Norman watched his son-in-law with new respect. Sometimes people surprised you when pushed far enough. Here's what's going to happen, Norman said, his voice calm again. Gabriel and Lindsay are staying married. You're going to leave them alone. You're going to stop manipulating, stop scheming, and stop trying to interfere in their relationship. Or what? Carol demanded, trying to salvage some authority. Norman smiled. Or I'll buy your debt. Every single loan, every line of credit, every margin call. I've already spoken to several of your creditors. They'd be happy to sell at a discount. Once I own your debt, I can call it due whenever I want. I can foreclose on your office, your house, every asset you have. I can destroy you financially without breaking a sweat. The threat hung in the air. Carol's lawyer instincts kicked in. That's extortion. No, Norman corrected. Extortion would be if I threatened to do something illegal unless you paid me. I'm simply explaining the consequences of continuing to harass my daughter. You made this about money. I'm showing you who actually has it. What you do with that information is your choice. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Gabriel, Lindsay, you're welcome to stay. Carol, Dolores, I think we're done here. The Comptons left without another word, Dolores practically running to their car. Through the window, Norman watched Carol slam his door hard enough to rock the BMW. Gabriel collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. I can't believe they did this. Any of this. Lindsay sat beside him, wrapping her arm around his shoulders. I'm sorry. I know they're your parents. They're con artists, Gabriel said bitterly. Everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. The legacy, the success, all of it was smoke and mirrors built on debt and deception. Norman poured 3 glasses of water and brought them over. Your parents made bad choices, Gabriel. That doesn't define you. The question is, what do you do now? Gabriel looked up, his eyes red but clear. I want to request a full audit of my trust fund. I want to know exactly what they took and when. And I want to press charges if they broke the law. That's going to be hard, Norman warned. They're your parents. They tried to destroy my marriage to cover their fraud, Gabriel said. That ended any claim they had on my loyalty. Norman nodded approvingly. The boy had spine after all. Lindsay looked at her father with tears in her eyes. Why didn't you ever tell me? About any of this. Because I wanted you to make your own way, Norman said. I wanted you to work hard, value money, understand what it takes to build something from nothing. If you'd grown up knowing I was wealthy, would you have finished college? Would you have taken that job you hated to pay your loans? Would you have learned the value of a dollar? Probably not, Lindsay admitted. Exactly. I gave you the same start I had. Nothing but love and the expectation that you'd work for what you wanted. You became the person you are because you had to earn everything. That's worth more than any trust fund. Gabriel cleared his throat. Mr. Benjamin, I need to quit my father's company. I can't work for him after this. But I need to find another job fast. We have bills. Already handled, Norman said. I spoke with Randolph Dow this morning. He runs a commercial real estate firm that's actually profitable. He's looking for an analyst with your background. The job's yours if you want it. Better pay than what your father was giving you, too. Gabriel's mouth fell open. You set that up this morning? I knew this conversation was coming, Norman said. Seemed prudent to have options ready. Lindsay hugged her father tight. Thank you. For everything. Norman hugged her back. That's what family does, sweetheart. We protect each other. 3 days later, Gabriel's forensic accountant confirmed what Norman's preliminary investigation had suggested. Carol Compton had embezzled nearly $300,000 from his son's trust fund over the past 4 years. The money had gone toward covering bad investments, maintaining appearances, and desperately trying to keep Compton and Associates afloat. Gabriel filed charges. The district attorney's office, smelling blood in the water and always eager for a high-profile white-collar case, took it eagerly. Carol Compton was arrested at his office. Perp walked past associates and clients in handcuffs. The footage made the evening news. Dolores tried to claim ignorance, but bank records showed her signature on several of the fraudulent transfers. She was charged as an accessory. Their assets were frozen pending investigation. The Comptons' carefully constructed social facade crumbled overnight. Country club memberships were revoked. Friends suddenly remembered previous commitments. Invitations dried up. In their world, perception was everything, and the perception now was that they were criminals and frauds. Norman kept his word about buying their debt. He purchased the notes on their house, their car leases, and the commercial loans on Carol's office building for 60 cents on the dollar. The creditors were happy to offload the risky loans. Norman was patient. He could wait for the legal process to play out before deciding what to do with the properties. Compton and Associates declared bankruptcy 2 weeks after Carol's arrest. The client list was acquired by a competitor for pennies on the dollar. The office building went into foreclosure. Norman bought it at auction for a quarter of its original value. He had plans to convert it into mixed-use space with affordable housing on the upper floors. For months after that dinner at Norman's small house, the trial concluded. Carol Compton was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for embezzlement and wire fraud. Dolores received 3 years for her role in the scheme. Both were ordered to pay restitution that they would never be able to afford. Gabriel had testified against his father. It had been the hardest thing he'd ever done, but also the most necessary. He told the court about the manipulation, the lies, the attempt to force him into a marriage to cover financial crimes. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Norman attended the sentencing. As Carol was led away in handcuffs, he caught Norman's eye. There was hatred there, but also something else, a bitter recognition. He'd played a game he thought he was winning, only to discover his opponent had been playing on an entirely different level. On a sunny Saturday in April, Norman hosted a different dinner at a different house. One of his larger properties, a beautiful colonial with a garden where Lindsay had played as a child. She'd never known he owned it. He'd always said he was house-sitting for a friend. The guest list was small. Lindsay and Gabriel, Gabriel's aunt who'd disowned Carol after learning about the fraud, and a few of Norman's oldest friends who'd been with him since the early days of buying condemned houses. Gabriel stood to make a toast. A year ago, I thought I knew who I was, the son of a successful family with a proud legacy. Turns out I was the son of criminals living on borrowed money and borrowed time. It was the worst discovery of my life, and also the best. He looked at Lindsay. Because it taught me what actually matters. Not money or status or country club memberships. Character. Integrity. Family. The real kind, not the fake kind I grew up with. He turned to Norman. Sir, you could have held this over my head. You could have made me feel small or obligated. Instead, you gave me a job on my own merit. Let me prove myself, and treated me with more respect than my own father ever did. You showed me what it means to be a man of substance instead of just appearance." Norman raised his glass. "You earned it, son. The job, the respect, all of it. You stood up when it mattered. That's character." Later, as the party wound down, Lindsay found her father in the garden. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. When I called you that day, crying about Gabriel's parents, did you already know? About their debt, their schemes, all of it?" Norman considered the question. "I knew Carol's company was struggling. That's public information if you know where to look. I didn't know about the embezzlement until I dug deeper. But I knew the type of people they were from the first time I met them. People who judge others by their net worth usually do so because they're insecure about their own. Real wealth is quiet. Desperation is loud. You taught me that," Lindsay said. "By living the way you do. By never caring what people thought." "I care what good people think," Norman corrected. "I just don't waste energy on the opinions of those who value the wrong things." The Comptons looked at my old car and small apartment and assumed I was beneath them. They never bothered to look deeper. "That's their loss, not mine. They're going to spend years in prison," Lindsay said quietly. "Part of me feels bad for them." "That's because you're a good person," Norman said. "But don't confuse compassion with excusing their actions. They made choices. They committed crimes. They tried to destroy your marriage to cover their own failures. Consequences are part of life. Do you think Gabriel will ever forgive them?" Norman thought about his son-in-law, who'd been working 70-hour weeks at his new job, determined to prove he could succeed on his own merit. Maybe someday. That's his journey to take. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means accepting what was and choosing not to let it poison your future. Lindsay leaned against her father's shoulder. "Thank you for waiting to tell me about your money. I get it now. If I'd known growing up, I might have turned out like them. Entitled, shallow, valuing the wrong things." "You could never be like them," Norman said. "You've got your mother's heart. She was the kindest, strongest person I ever knew. When she got sick and we had no insurance, no money, I promised her I'd build something better. Every property I bought, every deal I closed, it was for her. To prove that our circumstances didn't define our worth. I wish she could see what you built. She'd probably tell me I'm being too soft on the Comptons," Norman said with a smile. She had a sharp edge when it came to protecting family. They stood together in the garden as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, they could hear Gabriel laughing at something one of Norman's friends had said. It was a good sound, genuine, unburdened by the weight of family secrets and financial schemes. 6 months later, Gabriel got a promotion. His work at Dow Commercial had attracted attention from bigger firms, but he'd chosen to stay loyal to the man who'd given him a chance. He and Lindsay moved into one of Norman's properties, a 3-bedroom house in a good school district that Norman sold to them for half the market value. Gabriel insisted on paying every penny, even though it would take years. Norman respected that. The Comptons' house sold to pay restitution. The proceeds didn't cover even a fraction of what they owed, but it was something. Dolores's lawyer managed to get her sentence reduced to 18 months plus probation. She would be released to a halfway house, stripped of everything she'd once valued. The jewelry, the designer clothes, the social connections. Carol would serve his full term. Norman ran into Brittany Sutton at a charity gala. She approached him with a champagne flute in hand and a knowing smile. "You're Norman Benjamin," she said. "I've heard about you." "Nothing good, I hope," Norman replied. She laughed. "Actually, I wanted to thank you. I found out about the Comptons' little scheme to marry me off to their son. My father did some digging after the arrest and discovered they'd been courting him for investment in their company while simultaneously setting up accidental meetings between me and Gabriel. I'm sorry you were used like that. Don't be. It opened my eyes to how my family operates. We're not much better than the Comptons, honestly, just better at hiding it. Watching you expose them was instructive. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous." Norman raised his glass. "Not dangerous, just prepared. Is there a difference?" "I suppose that depends on which side of the table you're sitting." Brittany clinked her glass against his. "I'll try to remember that. And Mr. Benjamin, your daughter is lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have her," Norman corrected. A year after the sentencing, Lindsay came to Norman's apartment, the same modest place he'd always lived, with news. She was pregnant. Gabriel had been there too, beaming with pride and terror in equal measure. "We wanted you to be the first to know," Lindsay said. "Besides us, obviously." Norman felt his eyes water. "Congratulations. Both of you. You're going to be wonderful parents." "I'm terrified," Gabriel admitted. "What if I'm like my father? What if I mess this up?" "You're already different from him," Norman said. "You're asking the question. He never did. He just assumed he was right, and everyone else was wrong. That awareness, that fear of failing, that's what will make you a good father. Because you'll try. You'll care. You'll put your child first." "Will you teach them?" Lindsay asked. "About money, about building something from nothing, about character over appearance?" "I'll teach them what I taught you," Norman said. "That wealth is a tool, not an identity. That what you do matters more than what you have. That the measure of a person is what they do when no one's watching." Gabriel cleared his throat. "Sir, I was wondering if you'd consider being our child's godfather. I know that's a lot to ask, given everything." "I'd be honored," Norman said simply. They sat in his small apartment, surrounded by second-hand furniture and bargain decorations, and planned for the future. Norman thought about his own father, who'd left when Norman was 3. About his mother, who'd worked herself to death trying to provide. About the lessons he'd learned in poverty and the wisdom he'd gained in wealth. The Comptons had thought they could judge him by his appearance, intimidate him with their facade of success, and push him aside like he didn't matter. They'd learned the hard way that surface impressions were just that, surface. Real power, real wealth, real character ran deeper than designer suits and luxury cars. Norman's grandson was born on a Tuesday in October. They named him Benjamin Gabriel Compton, carrying forward both family names, honoring the past, while building toward the future. Norman held him in the hospital room and made the same promise he'd made to Lindsay when she was born. "I'll protect you, teach you, and love you. You'll build your own life, make your own way, and hopefully be better than all of us." Carol Compton sent a letter from prison asking to see photos of his grandson. Gabriel burned it. Some bridges, once burned, stayed burned. Dolores tried to reach out through lawyers, claiming grandparent rights. Her case was dismissed when the evidence of her attempted manipulation came to light. The child would grow up knowing the truth, that his paternal grandparents were criminals who valued money over family, appearance over substance. But he would also know his maternal grandfather, who'd built an empire from nothing and lived like he had everything because he valued the right things. On Benjamin's first birthday, Norman set up his first trust fund, not the kind the Comptons had controlled and stolen from. This one was ironclad, managed by independent trustees, untouchable until the boy turned 30. Inside the fund were 3 letters Norman had written, one to be opened at 18, one at 25, one at 30. The first letter read, "You're old enough now to understand that money is power, but power is responsibility. Use it wisely. Build something that matters. Help people who need it. Remember that wealth whispers while poverty shouts." The second letter, "You're building your career now. I hope you're doing work you love, not just work that pays. If you're struggling, that's good. Struggle builds character. If you're succeeding, share it. Success means nothing if you hoard it." The third letter, to be opened when the trust fund became available. "You have a choice now. You can take this money and live off it, or you can use it to build something greater. I hope you choose to build. Not because I expect it, but because I believe you're capable of it. This money represents 50 years of work, sacrifice, and careful planning. Make it mean something." Norman updated his will annually. The properties would be split, some to Lindsay and Gabriel, some to charity, some held in trust for Benjamin and any future grandchildren. The empire he'd built from condemned houses and late-night renovation work would continue beyond him, a legacy not of wealth but of values. He still lived in his modest apartment, still drove his Honda Civic, still shopped at discount stores. People still assumed he was just another retired worker living on a modest pension. He preferred it that way. The people who mattered knew the truth. The people who didn't matter didn't deserve to know. Sometimes Norman drove past the Comptons' old house, now owned by a young couple with 2 kids and a dog. They'd painted it cheerful yellow and planted flowers in the garden. It looked happy, happier than it ever had when the Comptons lived there, performing wealth they didn't have. He thought about the dinner that had changed everything, about the look on Carol's face when he realized he'd misjudged everything, about Dolores's horrified expression when her facade crumbled. He felt no guilt. They'd made their choices. He'd simply shown them the consequences. Gabriel had grown into his own man, no longer the weak-willed son afraid of disappointing his parents. He'd built a reputation in the industry based on integrity and skill. Some people still whispered about his father's crimes, but Gabriel held his head high. He'd testified. He'd done the right thing. That counted for something. Lindsay had started a nonprofit helping formerly encarceled individuals find housing and employment. She used some of her father's properties as transitional housing, giving people the second chance the Comptons had never given anyone. Norman was proud of her in ways he couldn't express. On a cool evening in December, 5 years after that fateful phone call, Norman sat in his apartment reviewing financial statements. His portfolio had grown despite the economic turbulence. Smart investments, patient holding, and a refusal to chase trends had served him well. His phone rang. It was Gabriel. "Hey, sir. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Carol's being released next month." He served his full sentence with no parole reduction. "How do you feel about that?" Norman asked. "Honestly, nothing. He's just a stranger who shares my DNA. He made his choices. I've made mine. That's a healthy perspective. He's going to be broke, you know? Dolores left him while he was inside. She's remarried to some guy she met in AA. Carol will have nothing. Part of me wonders if he'll try to reach out. And if he does, I'll tell him the same thing I told him at sentencing. He stopped being my father when he tried to destroy my marriage for money. Nothing's changed." Norman heard the strength in Gabriel's voice. Good man. After hanging up, Norman thought about Carol Compton, once so sure of his superiority, his status, his right to judge others. Now he'd emerged from prison with nothing, knowing his son had built a better life without him, knowing his grandson would grow up hearing about his crimes. Some people called that justice. Norman called it consequences. He closed his laptop and looked around his small apartment. Tomorrow he'd drive to Lindsay's house for dinner. Benjamin would show off a new drawing. Gabriel would talk about a big deal he'd closed. They'd eat together, laugh together, and be a family, the real kind, built on love and respect rather than money and manipulation. The Comptons had thought they were better than Norman because of their expensive clothes and fancy cars. They'd learned the hard way that true worth couldn't be leased or financed or faked. It had to be earned, built slowly over years of hard work and right choices. Norman had built his empire from nothing. He'd protected his daughter. He'd helped his son-in-law become a man of substance. He'd set up his grandson for success while teaching him values. That was legacy. That was wealth. And no amount of designer suits or country club memberships could buy it. He turned off the lights in his modest apartment and went to bed, satisfied. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build something that mattered. That was enough. That was everything. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.